History channel for our 2-hour live stream to catch up from this weekend where Easter plans and all sorts of stuff kept me from doing my live stream lecture and second part of my Q&A. So I will be doing that today with all of you. I will be covering my regular live stream lecture that was already pre-scheduled, the Korean War, as well as answering all of your questions and answers in the second hour. So we will be going for 2 hours today from about 5:15 to about 7:15 or so in Central Time. And so, hello and welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we bring you history that's friendly and enjoyable 24/7, 365, or 366. I am History Hefner, here to answer all of your history questions in the second hour of our broadcast. In the first hour, I will be covering my live stream lecture topic of the Korean War and also the, of course, huge breaking topic of the death of Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, the 266th pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church. And I will be discussing his life legacy and, of course, what happens now that he is dead, because I'd like to cover current events because they become historical almost immediately. And Bergoglio's papacy was one of the most historic in recent memory. So I will be talking about that and everything. So we'll talk about that for a few minutes, and then we're going to jump into my discussion of the Korean War, the forgotten war, the war a lot of people in history, in American history, don't like to talk about that much and don't spend enough focus on. The war that bridges the gap between the world of World War III, the war with the Nazis and Imperial Japan, and the Cold War world that was already taking shape before Korea and during Korea and really hit in its steady, solid structure by the end of that war. And of course, this war is gap between two of America's most famous wars, the war in Vietnam and World War II, which is what you call it. I consider it to be World War III. But this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we bring you history in a friendly neighborhood manner. And I'm just going to interact with the chat a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about the life of Pope Francis. And then I will jump in, or at least the legacy of Pope Francis and what happens now. I did a video about this because a lot of people are wondering, how does the next Pope get selected? And some people may already know that, and some people may not. And I know it's not exactly historical, but it is a historic process that has existed for an extremely long time, as long as the Catholic Church, one of the world's oldest institutions, certainly one of the oldest institutions in Western history, at least the oldest institution in Western history that's still extant to this day, has been around. So, Harry, good to see you. Hars, Steve, thank you for joining us. And yes, that's true. I was on the Alaska time zone, Steve. I apologize for being a little bit late. Let's see here. I'm sending a very important text message to somebody who needed to hear from me. Hars, great to see you. Hars is holding down the chat as my moderator. And thank you for joining us on this Monday afternoon, evening, whatever it is for you guys. Thank you so much. And Steve, I am not Catholic. I saw your question earlier. That is a Q&A, ask me anything question. Well, or am I? I don't really answer questions related to my personal beliefs, be it they political, so I don't say which political party I support, if I support any, or what religion I belong to, if I belong to any. I only relay information and ideas. I understand all the arguments for and against different religions or any religion at all. So, yes. And Pope Francis is obviously one of the most influential popes in recent Catholic history. Cardinals will come together and light colored smoke to significant, if they choose the Pope or not. Has Harsinet always be a moderator? No, that's new. We've got his moderator status now, so that's going to be something that hopefully he uses to hold down the chat and put in our social media handles. You can follow us on Instagram, X, or Facebook. I also have a Patreon where you get bonus and early content, and my Substack where I write articles. So if you don't like the sound of my voice, but you like my ideas about history and culture, check out my Substack. I just wrote an article today explaining exactly what I'm going to explain in this live stream lecture, how the next pontiff will be selected. So I will be discussing that really quick, and then we're going to get into the Korean War, which is the topic of a live stream lecture. Thank you for your patience. We weren't able to do Hearts. They are on the YouTube page itself, so go to the home page, and the socials are listed there. Instagram, X, and Facebook, as well as my Substack and Patreon should be there as well, so you can put those in the chat. If anyone wants to follow me there, they can get more updates and information on my socials, as well as that bonus content if they subscribe Patreon. So this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we bring you history in hopefully an interesting and friendly neighborly manner. And for the next 2 hours, I will be with you, spending the late part of a Monday afternoon, early part of a Monday evening, or the beginning of a late Monday night, early Tuesday morning with you guys. And I'm looking forward to it. Like and subscribe if you enjoy history and social studies and that kind of content. and that it's as easy as doing that to become a friendly neighborhood historian. So I'm History Hefner. I'm here in my usual studio, in my usual dressing gown, but not at my usual time. Obviously, Easter plans were kind of all over the place, so I had to reschedule the live stream lecture from yesterday. And the other truth of the matter is that Saturday we had scheduling conflicts, and I was out and about all day, basically out of town, and so I wasn't able to do my Q&A. So I'm making up for it today with 2 hours, one for the live stream lecture and one for the Q&A. So hopefully you guys really enjoy it. It is almost midnight over there in Great Britain, so you guys are about to be on Tuesday, the 22nd of April, 2 days after Easter. Hopefully everybody had a wonderful and relaxing holiday weekend and enjoyed their Easter and all of that stuff. Did all of the usual customary things for Westerners when it comes to celebrating Easter. And of those of you who don't celebrate Easter, I just hope you had a really great weekend, and thank you for joining us here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where we love history and talking about history, and where I handle history and history accessories. So, obviously, the big important news coming out of the Vatican is that Pope Francis has passed away. Francis became the Pope in 2013, succeeding Pope Benedict XVI, who was the first Pope in 6 centuries to resign. I think it was Nicholas VII or something in like the 1400s, who actually resigned the papacy and refused to be Pope anymore. And so this guy, Jorge Bergoglio, an Argentinian bishop, became the first non-European Pope in human history. Now, he's not the first non-Western Pope. Depending on your understanding and acceptance of different Catholic dogmas and things, the earliest popes, technically according to Catholic tradition, were not Westerners in the sense of not you have people who were from Israel and stuff like that. Supposedly St. Peter was the first pope according to Catholic tradition, and he was not a European, he was a first century Jew. But interestingly enough, based in modern history and our modern understandings, and based on the fact that we challenge the tradition of whether or not the Catholic Church actually started back then, whether or not Christianity actually started back then, Jorge Bergoglio is the first non-Western or non-European pope. He is from Argentina, although his family is actually one of a large number of descendants of Italian ancestry who have settled in South America. Between 1 and 2 million immigrants during the same time they were coming in large numbers to the United States went to South America of Italian heritage, looking for new economic and social opportunities due to economic stagnation and political infighting in their own country in the late 19th century. So, Pope Francis, which is the papal name that he assumed, was born Jorge Bergoglio, and he grew up, and I believe he was the Bishop of Buenos Aires. He was known for being rather humble, driving a really old car, taking care of the poor, and trying to bring awareness to climate change as well as social injustice and economic problems all over the world. That was a huge moniker of his time as a bishop and also as a rising member in the Catholic Church. He was on the younger side as a bishop, believe it or not, and in 2013, when Pope Benedict XVI, who had been Pope for about a decade, decided to resign, Jorge Bergoglio was eventually elected to be the Catholic Pope. Bergoglio was Pope for 12 years, and during that time oversaw a huge period of tumult in the Catholic Church, with controversies arising between traditionalists and modernists, liberals and conservatives, and continual debates, as many in the Catholic Church did not like Francis's more modern and open approaches to certain issues such as LGBTQ rights, social justice, and climate change, things that other popes tend to skirt by or oppose outright. Whereas Benedict was considered a conservative by most contemporary Catholics, Francis was considered to be on the more cutting liberal side. By the way, when he was elected in 2013, he is the first member of the Society of Jesus, which is a Catholic holy order, best known as the Jesuits, to ever be elected to the pontificate. Yet to represent the unity that is usually not shown between different Catholic groups of priests and missionaries, the Jesuits and Franciscans have a history of hating each other, he chose the name Francis based off of St. Francis of Assisi, the famous 13th century Italian monk who started the Franciscan order and was known for his charitable actions towards the poor. Francis was inspired by him and is the first pope in Catholic history to be named Francis, although he may not be the last one. So, Jorge Bergoglio in 2013 went from being the Bishop of Buenos Aires to being, as a cardinal, was eligible and was elected to be the Roman pontiff. The white smoke occurred, and I remember it very well. I was in high school at the time. I don't get into a lot of personal details about my age or stuff like that, but that might give you a good idea of my actual age. I remember very distinctly Jorge Bergoglio becoming the Pope, and a lot of people worried about some of his ideas. This was a typical issue of debate amongst Catholics. Obviously, Bergoglio dealt with other social issues that were impacting the Catholic Church as well. The Catholic Church has suffered in the last 25 years from a huge loss of people. Basically, it's been hemorrhaging membership over the last 25 years as societies, especially in the West, where Catholicism has been predominant, becomes more and more secularized. Church attendance, church participation, confirmation, all of these things that are huge parts of Catholicism became less and less strident, less and less important, and the number of declared Catholics became fewer and fewer as more and more people declared themselves to be religiously non-affiliated. Now, there are several reasons for this: the growing rise of sociologically, the growing rise of wealth, technological developments, scientific advancements, and religious skepticism and economic success lead a society usually towards more skepticism about ancient religious beliefs, such as the resurrection of Jesus, which is obviously the cornerstone belief of all of Christianity and Catholicism as well. So the Catholic Church has been in a series of decline because of all of these modern sociological features, yet the Catholic Church has done nothing to help itself in this process. Obviously, the biggest scandal involving the Catholic Church that has really come out over the last 30 years and has affected the pontificates of John Paul II, Benedict XVI, Cardinal Ratzenberger, as he was also known, and Jorge Bergoglio, aka Pope Francis, is the abuse of children, which has been a huge issue with Catholic priests being some of the most predominant cases of child abuse over the last, essentially the last century. Cases of abuse of altar boys and horrifying circumstances and terrible occurrences that have led to the devastation and the humiliation of the Catholic Church, has led to it being mocked, shamed, and scandalized. And basically, not only did the church know about this, but it sanctioned it and tried to keep it quiet, removing bishops and priests who have been accused of these things and moving them around to other parishes and other areas in the Catholic world so that they would not face the criminal charges that were necessary and could not be brought to justice. This has led to the Catholic Church having a black eye and many, many people leaving for this reason alone, which is completely understandable. Francis is obviously trying to play cleanup with a church that has lost a lot of dignity, and therefore the man did his absolute best as a humble and apparently straightforward man to be as transparent about his views and ideas as possible, and extremely critical of the church and some of its practices, both currently and in the past. So, it was so Francis came into the leadership of the church at a time when the church there are very few times the church has had less dignity than in 2013, and Francis did what he could during his 12-year pontificate to restore some of that dignity as best he could, preaching a message centered around social justice, understanding Christianity in relation to modern technology, the rise of new social issues, and like transgenderism, for instance, and of course Christianity's relationship to a growingly secular and affluent world that is also involved with other religions around the world and how they interact with this. This has led to some controversy, some criticism, and a lot of respect for the late Pope. Of course, obviously, most recently, Francis was quite ill. He was hospitalized with lung issues for 38 days, but was well enough to go home, leading many people to believe that he wasn't actually going to pass away, but had just simply gotten sick and might be getting over it. However, his deteriorating health has been a subject of some controversy over the last few years. Another thing that's been highly difficult for Francis, the Catholic Church, and many religious groups is the decline in religion following the COVID-19 pandemic, when fewer and fewer people felt the need coming out of the lockdowns to even go back to church. This has led to a deluge of people leaving Catholicism, leaving Protestant Christianity, leaving Judaism, leaving other religions, usually in the Western world. So Francis was obviously dealing with that as an act in the last few years of his papacy, trying to rebuild after the COVID-19 pandemic. However, Francis was ill for 38 days in the hospital with a lung disease, came home. It seemed like he was doing better. He even he greeted thousands of worshipers who were celebrating Easter in St. Peter's Square outside of Vatican, where he lives in Vatican City, which is the smallest country in the world, which was originally, by the way, given to the popes by Mussolini as an agreement called the Lateran Treaty in 1927 that finally got rid of the old papal state system where the Pope actually owned and was a political leader in Italy, and gave Vatican City to the office of the pontifex, and it being a closed-off section area of Rome that is its own country, the smallest in the world, whereas Rome, of course, is part of Italy. So Pope Francis greeted thousands of people there, and a couple days before that had greeted the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who has had some controversy arguing with the Vatican's policies towards immigration and welcoming migrants and refugees, something that contrasts significantly with conservatives in the United States. Francis then passed away at 7:35 a.m. on Easter Monday, the day after Easter, a significant day for Catholics and for Christians all over the world. So obviously this has been a subject of some controversy and commentary as well. And now the chair of Peter, which is supposedly what he sits in as the Bishop of Rome, is empty. There is no Catholic Pope, and there won't be for a little while, because now a process begins with the passing of Jorge Bergoglio. His efforts towards fighting for social justice, environmental reform, and economic security led to a lot of criticism from conservatives. His commentary on women's in the priesthood and in the leadership of the church, as well as abortion and other issues, led to a lot of criticism from liberals. And so Francis sometimes has found himself in a position where he can't seem to please anybody. His sensitivity towards religious indifferentism led many traditionalists in the church to absolutely despise him, and his closed-mindedness regarding women in the leadership positions, such as the diaconate or even the priesthood, led many to absolutely despise his traditionalism. So Francis is a liminal figure with a lot of moderate views at the end of the day that have risen a lot of concern and criticism. His papacy, although a lot of people are currently in mourning for him and for what it represented, will be remembered for his humility and grace and kindness as a human being, but at the same time, a period of darkness and travesty continues to flip by the church as large numbers of people left because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the growing secularism of the Western world, and of course, more than anything, that horrifying shadow and phantom of the abuse by the Catholic Church of children, and then the cover-up ensuing following, where bishops, priests, and men who were supposed to be trusted with the lives of the faithful turned into actual monsters. So Francis, obviously, supposedly, according to what we know, had nothing to do with that himself personally, and was absolutely appalled by that, and was very critical of the church and its handling of that, making a lot of apologies that are probably long overdue and extremely necessary if the Catholic Church ever wants to become the significantly influential entity that it used to be before those scandals broke out. So that is a quick summary of the life and pontificate of Francis, better known as, Jorge Bergoglio, better known as Pope Francis, who is now passed away at the age of 88 years old. And something that some people should notice always with a pope is that he is pretty old. Bergoglio was 76 when he became pope. Cardinal Ratzinger, who was Pope Benedict XVI, lived to be in his mid-90s. Popes usually are not pope that long. I don't know what the average length, I should have looked this up, the average length of a papacy is, but supposedly there have been 266 of them, and very few of them have been there longer than 20 years. So the Pope is a changing figure and one of the leaders, and obviously the leader of the Catholic Church, and for many is the representative figure of what Christianity is, regardless of what type of Christian that person tends to be. So that is what's happening next, and now it is up to his associates, the bishops, the cardinals, to choose the next pope. So this same process was done 12 years ago when Benedict became the first pope in 600 years to break down, decide to leave the papacy while still alive. And it is now up to these men, the cardinals, to meet and decide who the next pope will be. This is what's called the College of the Cardinals, where they are sequestered. By the way, if you guys haven't seen it, I recommend you watch the movie Conclave. It has a twist at the end that I found was a little bit out of bounds, but an extremely well done movie. Actually is very accurate in what the church actually does, and an excellent performance by Ralph Fiennes just is an emphatic point to it. So go ahead and check out that after you're done watching this, and check out my long form videos like the ones that dropped today at 5 p.m. Pacific time, and Fridays at 5 p.m. Pacific time as well. This one is a compilation of meme commentary that I've done, so hopefully if you want a good laugh and chuckle and a meme Monday, check out my compilation of historical memes coming out today at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So these are the cardinals, the College of the Cardinals, and they will be sequestered within the Vatican over the next few weeks, and they will be deciding and voting and for a democratic process, and one that involves a lot of politicking, manipulation, influences, promises, working together, agreements, coalitions form to elect the new pope. And a lot of these divides are based on ideological differences, no different than the U.S. Senate or the British Parliament, for example. However, many of them also have differences about the way the church should go, how the church should function in the 21st century, what matters, how does the church unify, where does the church go, how does it deal with these horrifying scandals that I mentioned before, how does it deal with the horrifying reality for churches post-COVID. All of that stuff is obviously going to influence the decision of these men as they look to prayerfully consider their next options for pope. There are several candidates who have been mentioned already, which is probably insensitive due to the fact that Francis barely just died last night. Well, early this morning. And so here in the Vatican, they will be sequestered and they will not have any contact with the outside world, and the outside world will have no contact with them. They will meet secretly in what is called a conclave. That is why the movie is called Conclave. And they will decide on who is the next man to lead the Catholic Church as the Bishop of Rome, sitting in the chair of St. Peter, who was supposedly the first Bishop of Rome and the first Catholic Pope. So, this process can take weeks sometimes. I forget how, I think it took like a week and a half for Francis to be selected after Benedict, and who knows who will be the next pope. That pope will change his name. He is a bishop, is a high-ranking bishop who was appointed to a position as a cardinal by the pope as an honor, meaning that he has the right to become pope or vote for the pope. And so that is why it's called the College of the Cardinals. Cardinals are high-ranking bishops who have achieved a status of eminence within the church. That's why they are referred to as Your Eminence, and they are obviously appointed by a pope. So when one cardinal dies, a new cardinal is appointed by a pope, and it's a bishop of a pope's liking. And so those men will meet and discuss and vote on who will be the next Roman Catholic pope. And who knows who will that be? We probably don't know exactly who he is. And then he will and then he will get a papal name, have a honeymoon period, and the entire process will continue. Supposedly this has not happened 266 times, but supposedly there have been 266 popes, and in modern history it has been very easy for the College of Cardinals to meet sequestered in Vatican City and vote on a pope. In the first few centuries of the church, when it was obviously being highly persecuted, this was a much harder and more difficult process, supposedly. Again, I'm using supposedly and allegedly because we're basing this only on Christian sources themselves rather than secular sources, so I'm not just saying it definitively happened because some Christian said it happened. I do that with any religion, for example. But the truth of the matter is, this process has been obviously, the glamour, glitz, wealth of the church and splendor of it has allowed it to make it a lot easier for this process to be known about, but the process still remains an intimate, quiet, and secluded process that we actually won't know the details of. We won't know how a particular bishop or cardinal votes. We won't know what the final vote is, if it's 100 to 50 or something like that. But these cardinals are bishops that come from all over the Catholic world, from Africa, South America, Asia, Europe, North America, Australia, and they will decide in a way, the future direction of the Catholic Church by selecting the Pope. So that College of the Cardinals will meet for a couple of weeks, and then the Pope will come out and they will vote, and there will be black smoke that emits after every vote if they are not able to get a majority. And when they get a majority and that man accepts the papal job, they will burn papers, and white smoke will come out of a plume there at the Vatican, and that will indicate to the world that a new pontiff has been selected. So we are now awaiting that process, and I don't know exactly when it will start, as the Pope just died yesterday or today, whatever you want to say. So that is a quick overview of Pope Francis, his history, his impact on the Catholic Church, his pontificate, and the election of the new Pope. And we will see what happens next. And that is the first part of my live stream lecture. If you enjoy history, social studies, you're in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing and all of that great stuff. I'm not answering questions right now, but I will later on. I'm History Hefner at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, answering all your questions related to history and social studies. Let's see. I hope you guys enjoyed that. And if you did, again, like and subscribe. And now we are moving on to my other topic, the Forgotten War, the Korean War, which was my original live stream lecture. I do these live stream lectures every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I also do my Q&A, Ask Me Anything, every Friday we're going to move it back. It's going to be Fridays at 6, and then Saturdays at 6 as well. So before you go and start partying on Friday nights, and before you continue the partying on Saturdays, join us for a little history and get all of your social studies yens answered by me, History Hefner himself. Liking and subscribing helps our channel grow. It helps the logarithm. It gets more people in here, gets more questions going. So if you want a good Q&A, Ask Me Anything session, and you want to learn more about history, consider that. And why am I wearing the robe? This is my dressing gown, which was given to me by a Patreon subscriber and a well-known member of the Friendly Neighborhood History community, and I really appreciated it as a holiday gift, so I decided that I would wear this until the summer when it got too hot to wear. But this is my smoking jacket, which makes me History Hefner, according to everybody. So, yes, that is one question I will answer for now. And Hars, if you can put the social media handles in the channel, I will pin that so you guys can follow me there. And Airplanes, good to see you again, but I still don't think you know where I live. So, the Forgotten War, the Korean War. The Korean War could not have possibly happened without World War II, or as I like to consider it, World War III, because I believe there have been 3 world wars. But for the sake of convenience and ease for everybody around, I will refer to it as World War II for now. If you want to know my full beliefs about that, go and check out my live stream lecture and my full-length video on the 7 Years' War, where I discuss the actual history surrounding it and how it is easily the First World War, and then the Second World War would be the Great War of the 1910s, and the Third World War would be the Nazis and Imperial Japan. In my opinion, World War III, or World War II, begins in 1937 when the Japanese at the Marco Polo Bridge use an excuse to attack the Chinese, starting what is called the Second Sino-Japanese War. For years, China had been at civil war between the Nationalist Front, led by Sun Yat-sen and then his successor Jiang Jiechi, or Chiang Kai-shek, and the Communist the Gomindang, led by Mao Zedong. These factions have been fighting for years, and when the communists had seemed to be down and out, they had continued the fight, and the Civil War actually gave them the excuse they needed to regroup and rebuild, because the nationalists and the communists had a common enemy, the Japanese. Japan had already fought a war with the Chinese and won that war in the 1890s. That was called the First Sino-Japanese War, and this war, part of World War III, is called World War II, is called the Second Sino-Japanese War, and it lasts from 1937 to 1945. When Japan surrenders to the Allies, it surrenders to the Chinese as well, and the United States and Great Britain, continuing the tradition of helping future enemies, gave lots of supplies to the Chinese, including Mao Zedong, who was about to become a huge opponent of Western ideas during his dictatorship in the 1950s and 60s. What does this have to do with the Korean War? I'm glad you asked. In the First Sino-Japanese War, Korea had been in the middle between Japan and China. Highly under the influence and control of the Chinese for centuries, the Japanese had won control of Korea during that part and made it part of their empire of the rising sun. Japan had rapidly industrialized in the late 19th century and become extraordinarily powerful and strong, basically feeling that if you can't beat the Europeans, you can join them in their process of industrialization. And they had made themselves a world power, and Korea was one of their colonies, basically. The Koreans didn't like this, still do not very much care for this, but for decades, that had been one of the areas where the Chinese, Japanese, and the Russians had been fighting for control, dominance, and influence. So, in 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War begins, and it lasts for 8 years, and part of that is obviously World War III, meaning there was fighting in Korea. Now, communists in China and Russia, the Soviet Union, were extraordinarily interested in getting Korea to become a communist country. This was a debate between the Allies about what the post-war world would look like. The more that governments and new principalities could be influenced by communism, the better off the Soviet Union would be. The more aid the Soviet Union gave the United States and Great Britain, the easier it was for them to win the war. One of the biggest concerns near the end of the war, after Germany dropped out, was Japan. If Japan refused to surrender, even after the use of atomic bombs, the US was worried that the Soviet Union, in exchange for more land, influence, and power, would need to invade Japan. And they actually did seize some of the islands in the north of where Japan, the archipelago of Japan, actually is. So an agreement was made. I believe it might have been at Yalta or Tehran. These are two places where the Allied leaders, Joseph Stalin, the dictator of the Soviet Union, Franklin Roosevelt, the US president, and Winston Churchill, the British prime minister, all met and discussed the future of what Europe and the Asian world would look like after World War II or World War III. Yes, I know and understand the problem with this. You have 3 white guys basically determining what the lives of hundreds of millions, billions of people even who are not white are going to look like in the Middle East and Asia. So what eventually happens? There's the Tehran conference, there's the Yalta conference, and eventually they come to an agreement where Korea will be split. So China will be allowed to resume its civil war, which it does after World War II ends. So South Korea will be occupied by Allied forces, Britain and the United States, and the Soviets will be able to occupy North Korea and start setting up a communist government, while the South will presumably set up a democratic, capitalistic government, and thus there will be two. Sorry about that. And thus there will be two different. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. There will be two different countries. One will be a communist government, and one will be a free government. And basically, at that point, the British don't have much of a say in it. It's usually the United States and the Soviet Union that are making these decisions. And so North Korea will be able to establish a communist government in the late 1940s under Kim Il-sung. And in the South, a democratic government will be set up as the United States occupies Japan and then uses their control over Japan to control Korea and set up a government opposed to communism. It is becoming obvious by the end of the war that despite fighting with each other, the Soviets and the United States are using each other to increase their own influence, power, and control. It's neither Bellaccio, but thank you. So you have the United States and the Soviet Union using each other. They had used each other to defeat the Germans, had almost used each other to defeat the Japanese, and basically had wanted to gain as much influence, hegemony, and economic and political control. And it becomes obvious that the Soviet Union and the United States, due to their ideological differences and their distrust of each other, will become enemies. Now, a land war would mean massive amounts of casualty and death, so obviously a hot war isn't on the table. But a cold war, where they're both trying to usurp and undermine each other through manipulation and different sorts of tactics and proxy wars, and by setting up puppets who will war against each other and trying to spread the influence of communism and capitalism, that is going to become the basis of what's known as the Cold War. And by the late 1940s, the Cold War is ramping up in Europe, but and it's also ramping up in East Asia, especially in an incredibly important year, 1949. In 1949, China, the Gomintang, is successful and defeats I think it's Kuomintang, which is the nationalist front. So Chiang Kai-shek is forced to flee with his forces to Taiwan and set up a government there that becomes the Nationalist Republic of China. The People's Republic of China is established by Mao Zedong the same year and is obviously a huge boost to communist efforts in Asia with the support of the Soviet Union. Now, Korea becomes a huge locus of focus. You have two communist countries next to it, and the U.S. trying to uphold a democratic government in the South. So South Korea versus North Korea, it's already shaping up that way, especially when the North Koreans, emboldened by the Chinese and the Russians and aided by them, send forces into the South and push down past the 38th parallel. The 38th parallel is the line that divided North and South Korea. 38th degree longitude is where it is divided to this day. This is the beginning of the Korean War. The South Korean government is almost completely overthrown. Their capital of Seoul is occupied by the North Koreans and their allies. And this is when the United States mobilizes the United Nations to condemn the actions of North Korea and create a force led by World War II Pacific Theater hero Douglas MacArthur to fight in Korea. So MacArthur lands in Japan, which the U.S. is currently occupying, and mobilizes large forces. So Great Britain, which Harry will appreciate hearing, fights in the war. I believe the French help in the war as well, the Australians, the Canadians, and the United States is just the main leader. And of course, they are being helped by the Japanese and ostensibly the South Koreans. So this is the beginning of the Korean War, the Forgotten War. MacArthur, in 1950, is seeing this circumstance and realizes that the best way for the U.S. to win the war is to go behind enemy lines. He decides to take a risk to knock out the North Koreans quickly and force them to retreat northward rather than fighting up. So he goes around the enemy-controlled areas and lands in the actual land of North Korea at a place called Incheon. This Incheon landing surprises the entire world. It's a huge military risk, yet it's successful. Similar to the Normandy invasion, the Americans are able to carve out a beachhead with the help of their UN mobilized allies, the British and the French and stuff like that. And then the North Koreans are forced to pull back their forces, and it looks like MacArthur is not only going to defeat them, but a couple months after Incheon, it looks like he is actually going to seize the entire peninsula in the name of the United States and then probably turn it over to the South Korean government. This is when the Chinese step in and send 1 million soldiers, yes, 1 million with 6 zeros after it, some odd number, into Korea. This backup overwhelms the Americans and Koreans and their allies and forces them back below the 38th parallel, where the fighting becomes very much a stalemate for the next 2.5 years. About 30,000 Americans will die during this conflict. I don't know. The number of Koreans, I think, is in the hundreds of thousands, and tens of thousands of Chinese will die as well. Now, this is where things start to get very tense on the U.S. front. Douglas MacArthur believes that the U.S. should use as much force as possible to not just invade North Korea and turn the tide back in their favor, but also overthrow China and overthrow the communist government of China and give the Kuomintang a chance to take over China and overthrow Mao Zedong. Yes. Meanwhile, brainwashing, manipulation, espionage, and all the tactics, not just of World War II, but also of the Cold War itself, tend to loom and overshadow the entire conflict, leading the war to being one of the most difficult and nasty of the century, but people do not talk about as much. The fear of the Soviet Union, which has just gotten the atom bomb, worries the United States and President Truman, who feels that using overwhelming force will trigger a nuclear war with the Soviets, who have not only gotten the A-bomb, but are now building A-bombs at a significant rate. And of course, he is dealing with China, which is the most populous country on the world, and their large numbers of Chinese Red Army, the Red Guard and Red Army, who will not hesitate to kill and fight at will and not give up anytime soon. The United States has just gotten out of a world war and doesn't really necessarily want to cause another one. Truman and MacArthur start to bicker. MacArthur insists that Truman use nuclear weapons and atom bombs to basically knock the Chinese and maybe even the Soviets out. The potentiality of causing a world war worries Truman, and so he relieves MacArthur of his duty for insubordination and replaces him with Omar Bradley, who becomes I believe it's Omar Bradley, who becomes the commander of the forces in Korea, and the war continues in that stalemate front with no side really gaining an advantage until 1953. This becomes a war that becomes a very war-weary conflict as American citizens get tired of the fighting. 30,000 Americans die. And by 1952, they want the war to end. So the new president, who was elected, Dwight Eisenhower, who is a Cold Warrior, who obviously has no affinity for the communists, declares that his biggest agenda in foreign policy is ending the Korean War. And eventually, a ceasefire is declared at Panmunjom in October of 1953. And after 3 years of U.S. involvement and about 4 to 5 years of fighting in Korea, the two sides go home. The South will remain a democratic capitalist society, while the North becomes a communist stronghold, highly influenced by the Chinese and Soviet Union, and it remains a kind of nationalist communist government to this day, even after the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. Kim Il-sung will remain its dictator until his death in 1994, whereas South Korea is going to go through a multitudinous array of issues with corrupt democratic governments. Sung's, I think it's his son, Kim Jong-il, will become the dictator until about 2012, 2013, when he dies and is replaced by his grandson, Kim Jong-un, who is the current leader of North Korea to this day. So, the Korean War is a forgotten war. It is the first major war, not the last one, of the Cold War, where the United States is forced to show down with the Soviets indirectly, and the proxy are the Koreans, who obviously get mangled during this affair, and it obviously leads to the divisions that continue to block North and South Korea to this day, with many fearing that North Korea, if it develops a nuclear program, will invade the South, take over it, and then threaten Japan itself. It is the first time that the United States uses its advantage over Japan to help them win a war. Although the war isn't technically won. It is a stalemate. The results, if the U.S. had not gotten involved, all of Korea would have become a communist dictatorship to one extent or another, led by the Sungs, and that family would control all of Korea, assuming nothing else would have changed. The Chinese established themselves as a predominant communist power and feel very entitled and privileged after this. And Mao shows his military superiority and might that had helped him survive the persecutions of the Kuomintang, overcome the Japanese invasion, and then defeat the Kuomintang in the Civil War to become the leader of the People's Republic of China, the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. So, where are we? Basically, Korea is divided and has been divided ever since, with the North and South being extraordinarily different and influenced in many different ways, despite their shared, obviously, historic and ethnic heritage. The Cold War is off to a bang, unfortunately, with a lot of dying, a lot of fighting, and not much changing. Basically, this war seems to be a war of inches, very much like the First World War at the beginning of the century, where people were fighting in trenches just for small gains, and that's what it seems to be between the United States and the Soviet Union. Obviously, Korea falls by the wayside, as many of the people who fought in the silent generation or the Korean War generation are kind of mixed between the greatest generation, those who survived the Great Depression and then fought World War II, and the next generation, the largest generation in American history, the baby boomers, who obviously will be fighting and resisting to fight in the next big conflict of the Cold War, the Vietnam War, which will be a loss for the United States, which was trying to set up a Korea-like situation with a North and South government, but could never prop up a proper South Vietnamese government like they kind of achieved in South Korea, although the government of South Korea continues to be on shaky ground to this day. And once again, you have an overwhelming imperialistic and colonialist idea coming from it, where you have the people of that native land being basically dictated their options by Europeans and Westerners, who then go to war with each other to dictate exactly what's going to happen, and the people in the middle end up suffering. Many Americans believe a war is a loss, but many Americans also believe a war is a victory, because they kept South Korea from falling under the invasion of the Soviets and the communists, and kept communism from spreading to the entire Korean peninsula. At the same time, obviously, untold amounts of human suffering for a stalemate does not feel like a victory, and the demilitarized zone exists to this day, demarking the point in the 38th parallel near Panmunjom, where the stalemate was eventually agreed upon between the United States and between North and South Korea. The war has technically not ended to some extent. That's a small technicality, but basically, although both sides are not going to fight, fighting could resume at any time, and that is why a demilitarized zone exists. So that is the quick summary and information and background of the Korean War, the Forgotten War, in which the United States did everything in its power to keep Korea from falling under the complete control of a communist dictatorship. Well, communism once again spread very easily in Asia at this time. The Soviet Union and China would see this as a success. China would be able to flex its communist muscles, and the Soviet Union would use its growing nuclear arsenal to detract the Americans from using their nuclear weapons or from invading China. So it also saw the fall of the pride cometh before the fall of Douglas MacArthur, who, believing that he was superior, could overcome millions of Chinese soldiers if he had invaded China or if nuclear weapons had been used. And eventually he falls apart. Hold on a second.
And
Sorry about that. Somebody wanted to give me something, but it wasn't that time. So, anyways, I've been told of other plans that I had forgotten about, and I need to get those underway. So, anyways, I have been able to anyways, I've been able to describe the Korean War to all of you, discuss the history of the Forgotten War. I'm sorry for the interruptions and everything. I do owe you guys another hour. I'm not going to be able to do it right now because I was reminded of plans that I had made that I am not fulfilling with one of my roommates, and so I am very sorry about that. But basically, my roommate came in. Yes, that's true. I do need to be this handsome, though. But anyways, so my roommate's like, hey, we have to do this. You said you were going to do it. You didn't get to do it this weekend, so now I have to go do it now. I apologize. It's a pressing matter of business. I had totally forgotten about that, and I'm sorry for all the interruptions and everything, and for flipping my camera around. But you got a good view of the studio and the screen and everything. Yeah, I do need a new roommate, that's for sure. But yes, I appreciate everybody for coming. I'm so sorry to stop this right now. I owe you guys another hour. Hopefully I can do that tonight. If not tomorrow, at some point we will be doing an hour of Q&A, Ask Me Anything. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Korean War. I am sorry for the egg on my face, but hopefully you learned a little bit about the history of Korea and the Forgotten War. And Harsh, thank you so much for suggesting this topic. Remember to take care. Thank you so much for subscribing. And I will see you hopefully at another live stream later today, and have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. If not, we'll be back tomorrow, and I'll figure out something to do my AMA, where you can ask me anything about history and social studies. So take care. Have a wonderful month. See you tomorrow. And remember, love history. I would say 9 Eastern. 9 Eastern. If we can do tonight, we'll do it at 9 Eastern. So 6 on the Pacific coast, and that's like 2 a.m. in Great Britain. So I'm sorry for all of my foreign watchers, but yes, we will do our absolute best to have something tonight, if not tomorrow. Take care. Have a great day. Love history.